So in our last session, I was discussing about relative pronouns like who, that, which, or whose, such things which I was discussing, which should be appropriate in which situations and when. So this time I have come up with some examples and some more details like how we can identify and how we can communicate or how we can understand from others written pieces, like what exactly are they saying. So I left last time at relative pronouns in the restrictive relative clauses. So as I mentioned, there are broadly relative clauses are distributed in two types. One is restrictive relative clause, another one is non-restrictive. So what it means is restrictive means it gives the information which is necessary. The one which is undefining or unrestrictive is it also gives necessary information and it gives some extra information. Even we can omit that information without changing the sentence meaning. So that is the primary difference between two of them. So I'll continue from there and I'll show you some examples. So here if you see in English there is actually only one possessive relative pronoun, which is whose. We might have used it in different situations, like in this particular case, if you see the example here, the family whose house burnt in the fire was immediately given a complimentary suite in a hotel. So whose is actually a relative pronoun. It is talking about belongingness. So it is talking about house belonging to a family, and book. So in both of these cases, one is a person or people and another one is a thing. So whichever is the particular element, maybe either it be person or it may be a thing, whose would come here. So that is the only relative pronoun that only talks about belongingness. So that would be appropriate here in this situation. Now we'll see relative pronouns in non-restrictive relative clauses, like the one which I mentioned, the non-defining relative clauses, which gives extra information, more qualitative information, this thing. So one primary in while we use relative pronouns, the primary usage or primary addition or subtraction would be, in case of restrictive relative clauses, we use that. In case of non-restrictive relative clauses, we use which. There would be some exceptional cases where they could be used interchangeably. But in case of restrictive relative pronouns, there would not be any comma, because the meaning of the sentence, entire information elements provided in that sentence is very vital and very important. In case of non-restrictive one, because it is adding extra information, there needs to be comma. As I mentioned during this advent of our KKSS sessions on English, where we discussed that extra non-essential elements could be separated by commas. So that is what happens in non-restrictive relative clauses as well. So if you see, the non-restrictive relative clauses are separated from the main clause by a comma. So because it is not a vital information, it is separated by a comma. In case if it is an important information, we don't separate it by comma. And which is preferred instead of that here, because this is non-restrictive relative clauses, it is adding extra information. So which is more preferable one than that? In case of restrictive relative clauses, which completely whole sentence is vital, that is used. That is one thing. So non-restrictive relative clause, which is also called as non-defining one, it gives an essential information about the antecedent, either it be a person, thing, or place, or anything. It basically gives an non-essential information which is separated by a comma and which is used. So just that with the omission of that information also, the sentence still remains the same, or it cannot get altered. So that is one thing which we could easily identify whether it is a relative restrictive one or non-restrictive one. So here are some examples here. So in this case, relative pronouns are used for subject. So if you see, the science fair, which lasted all day, ended with an awards function. If you just remove this information which is provided between the commas, which lasted all day. If you see, the science fair ended with an award ceremony, it still stands the same, because what you wanted to say is the science fair which ended with an award ceremony. So it is not altering any information, it still remains the same. Suppose in case if there are so many science fairs which are being conducted in a place, like different colleges have come, different science fairs they're conducting individually, and you are specifically referring to one person, then that becomes essential information, then which would be removed, and you will give more other information to give more clarity on this thing. But in this case, there is only one science fair you're saying it was ended with an awards ceremony, and you're saying it lasted all day. So this is non-essential information because we can omit this. Still, the whole sentence, the main clause remains the same. So which is used here. In the second example, the movie turned out to be a blockbuster hit, which came as a surprise to the critics. So basically, what you wanted to communicate is the movie turned out to be a blockbuster hit. That's what the writer wanted to say, which came as a surprise to critics. That is an extra information because even if you omit it, still what the subject is talking about, what the communication is happening, it still remains the same. The essential information is being communicated. Sometimes we might have a doubt like which is the subject and which is an object, because usually we get sometimes in the sentence it becomes difficult to identify. The best way to identify a subject and object is verb always follows the subject. It will not follow the object. So I'll show you two examples there. And so here in this case, non-restrictive relative clauses talk in specific to subject, because here the relative pronoun is talking to subject, which is talking about the science fair. Science fair is the subject. And here also which, what is which? You're talking about the movie. So which is referring to, this relative pronoun is referring to the subject. Here also the relative pronoun which is referring to the science fair. We'll see relative pronouns used for the object here in the cinema. The examples are the sculpture which he admired was moved into the basement of the museum to make room for a new exhibit. So if you remove this information which is in between the comma, if you say the sculpture was moved into a basement of the museum to make room for a new exhibit, the sentence information or the sentence communication still remains the same, and it is only just an extra information is being added because we can omit and still the sentence can stand alone. So this is not an essential information. So we are separated by comma and which is used. So if you see here, this sculpture is not the subject here. He is the subject here. Why is this? Because in this case, the science fair is the subject. The movie is subject, which has come in at the beginning. But here the sculpture has come in the beginning, but it is not treated as subject. It is treated as object. The reason is, if you see here, the sculpture which he admired. He admired. Admired is a verb. And admire is talking about whom? He admired. The sculpture is not admiring. He is admiring. So verb always follows the subject. So here in this case, he is the subject, not the sculpture. Automatically the other one becomes the object.
Surya, that he was a part of a non-restrictive clause, no? The sculpture was moved into the basement. Says moved was the verb where sculpture is the subject, right?
So I didn't get it, Sina. Once again, can you please repeat it?
So the he is a part of the non-restrictive clause, right?
Right.
Clause. But if you remove that clause, the sculpture was moved into the basement, where moved is the verb and sculpture becomes the subject. So should we check for subject in the main sentence, or is it okay to look into the non-restrictive relative clause as well?
Right. So this is something which I observed just now, Sina.
All right. No.
So I'll just look into it. I think that was a good one actually, because it was more, the sculpture was more. That one, there is a verb here also. But in most of the cases, verb is actually followed by follows the object. So in case if we remove it, we'll do an iteration here. We'll just see the sculpture was moved into the basement of the museum to make the room for a new exhibit. If we remove the essential information, if we just put it this way, the sculpture was moved into the basement of the museum to make room for a new exhibit. Now in this case, the sculpture is becoming the subject because the verb is referring to the sculpture, and the museum becomes the object here. In case if I put it this way, then it becomes, so it basically is from the point of view of the author or the writer who is actually communicating. So I can omit this information. If I omit it, then sculpture becomes the subject. If I put this extra information, if I talk about this, then this is becoming the the subject here in this case. So is that did you get this, Sina?
Yeah.
So we'll see the second sentence here, second example. The theater in which the play debuted housed 300 people. So if you see here, if you just remove the information which is mentioned in between these commas, It still says the theater housed 300 people. Basically, you're talking about you're just quantifying the people, how many people have come in. So, and in which the play debuted is giving an extra information. It is separated by comma and which is used. And if you see debuted, the play debuted. So debuted, this action is talking about the verb, the play. So this becomes the subject. The theater becomes the object here. So that's how you can identify the subject and object. And you see, non-essential information is separated by a comma. There are some practice examples we'll look into. On this
just
thing.
One point, I think even in the first sentence, when we say which he admired, that which he admired part, I think you call that an adjunct or something, that non-essential information. So even though there is a non-essential information, and when you put it in, the subject remains the sculpture. So you have that. I forgot the exact name. So they split the sentence into these different components. So sculpture is, we call it a subject. So yes, so then which he admired becomes adjunct or a. So yes, a was moved is verb. So yes, a, we, see or something. Subject, adjunct, verb, complement. There is this thing that people do. I think still the sculpture will be the subject, sculpture only.
So is it the sculpture only the subject sai, or is it the sculpture or which it together becomes the subject?
The sculpture is the subject, which he admired is an adjunct, was moved is the verb.
Okay.
The into the basement is, I don't know, call it a complement or something. Not sure the exact terminology.
Okay, got it.
But just take one. I'm just saying from what I remember.
And that seems right, actually. So because it's a non-essential part of a sentence, it's not the main thing on that sentence. So the main thing is supposed to be looked at it outside of it, right? Outside of it, that becomes the subject. I think that's what I also feel. Yeah.
But I have taken this example directly from the OWL. So
okay,
basically that is what they have given. So as per that, he is the subject here. Sculpture is an object. I think I have to look into it. Maybe some extra rules might have been put in. Maybe because we'll have a combination. What we say, a combination of words together make a subject of this thing. I'll look into it.
Okay.
I'll just see. So this is about the relative pronoun referring to an object, because here which is referring to an object here also. That is what. Earlier one it was referring to subject. We'll see other pronouns, other relative pronouns, like which would be appropriate in which situations. If you see, we have taken 3 examples here: that, who, and which. That was even these things. So if you see all these 3 relative pronouns, for the restrictive relative clauses, means the ones which are giving essential information, important information, that is the preferable one. We use that. Which would be used only in cases where you are specifically referring to anything or any, not particularly to the person. When you're referring to any other non-living thing or any such thing, we'll see there are examples, we'll see them. But mostly for restrictive relative clauses, that is the preferred one. Which means if you are adding an essential information and it is not separated by comma, that is preferred. And that can be substituted by 2 other relative pronouns, who and which. In which cases is when who is substituted with that, when if it is referring to a person. So usually we say the person who got into this train, like when we use this thing. So we are referring to the people. So in that case, who becomes the substitute for that, and which becomes the substitute when it is referring to things in informal English. We'll see, and where that is often used while speaking. So if you see, when we are communicating anything, because we are not directly talking, because when you read something, we might not get the emotion which the person is talking, or the intensity which the person is talking. So that's why whenever we see in a written communication, there are so much clarity or so much additional things have been mentioned. While in case of when we talk verbally, there is a difference. So in case of formal English, which means the written communication English, when who and which is particularly used because who and which is, there is a distinction. It is distinguishing the person and the things. In case of that, it is easily replaceable for these two things, but it still does not give additional adequate clarity to the reader who is reading. So we'll see them with examples, why, in which cases we'll use. So in case of conversational use, which means in informal usage, there is an example here, as you see. William Kellogg was the man that lived in the late 19th century and had some weird ideas about raising children. So William Kellogg is a person, but we did not use who. We simply we said that because that is also appropriate. It is mostly preferable in the conversational use, because we don't use so many elements in while conversing, because the other person would easily identify it. But in case of written or formal English, we would say William Kellogg was the man who lived in the late 19th century and had some weird ideas about raising children. So who is talking about the person. So the moment you see who, you'd see this is referring to a person. It gives more adequate clarity to the reader without any confusion. So that thing. We'll see another example here. In case of conversational use, the informal use, the spatula that has a cracked handle is in the drawer. In the written one, you'll say the spatula which has a cracked handle is in the drawer. So which is talking about a thing, not the person. So same for who and for which, that can be replaceable, but only in the informal and conversational use. And for written or formal usage, which and who gives more adequate clarity to the reader. So that is the preferable one.
This means which can be used for both restrictive and non-restrictive, but
which can be used for restrictive and non-restrictive, but which is used only if it is referring to the thing. But either of the cases, you can replace the which and that with who. Sorry, who and which with that, but only in the conversation.
And in non-restrictive clauses, only which is used.
Mostly which is used.
Okay.
There are certain exceptions. There are some rules in the coming slides. There are certain exceptions where we use this thing. But in restrictive one, that is the preferable one. Non-restrictive one, which is the preferable one. In restrictive one also, that could be replaced with which when you want to give adequate clarity in the written communication. If you are referring to person, who this thing. But usually that is preferred. Yeah. And some special uses of relative pronouns in restrictive clauses, we'll see. That or who. So when referring to people, as I said, that and who can be used in normal informal language. Who gives more adequate clarity, it becomes usually that is preferred in the formal usage. There is other usage like when that can be used. So suppose if you're not talking about the person, you're talking about the characteristics or abilities. Abilities also kind of characteristics which you're talking about, but a person or an individual or a group of people, you would see. Let us see an example here. If you see, he's the kind of person that or who will never let you down. Here, that and who both could come here. You see, he's the kind of person that will never let you down. So that is not actually referring to kind of person. The characteristics, you're basically describing characteristics here. You could say he is the kind of person who will never. So you're basically talking about the person only, but the highlighted thing is the characteristics or his ability. That is also an important gist of the sentence here. If you see here, I'm looking for someone that could give me a ride to Chicago. I'm looking for someone who could give me a ride to the Chicago. That or who is actually talking about the person or a thing, or the person or an individual or a group of people. But what you're saying is, here you're talking about the ability here. Who could give me a ride to Chicago? Basically, whether the person could give me, you're talking about the capability or the ability or the characteristics. So in that cases, that or who both could come. So and which in the above one, which I said, who is basically talking about the person when you're referring to person in the written one, who is used, and when you're talking about the thing which is used. But here in this case, in both cases, that and who both could come in case if you're talking or highlighting about the characteristics or abilities or capabilities of the person or a group of people. That is the thing. However, when speaking about a particular person in formal language, who is preferred. So just like the previous one, this one is preferred, and you don't have to confuse what that could be used or who could be used, because both of them could be written. The only thing is this is the preferable one in case if you are referring to the person, this thing, but that and who both could come. both could take the place. That basically depends upon what quality or your characteristic which you're describing. We'll see two more examples here. The lady who lives next door is a teacher. So basically you're talking about the characteristic of the person, what kind of job that person does. You see, the girl who wore a red dress attracted everybody's attention at the party. So in this case, if I put the old lady that lives next door is a teacher, still communicates the same meaning. It is not altering the meaning, it is not modifying any meaning, it is still communicating the same meaning. But just like the previous one, formally we use who, but still that could also be utilized, and it does not alter the meaning. Basically what I'm highlighting is both of them could be used, but the meaning alteration is not possible, unlike that or which we talked in the restrictive or unrestrictive one. So this is the one. But in formal one, for people you use who, and informal both could take place, that and who. That is the thing in this case. And just like that or who, we'll see the same kind of examples for that and which, that or which one could take place in which situation. So if you see, there will be so many pronouns in English. Like if you don't want to, usually you're not describing a single person, you're describing a whole group as together. You'll say all, or you could say many people, or you could say if you're describing a quantity, you would say much. So basically these pronouns, all, anything, or everything, few, little, many, much, none. So these pronouns, in such cases, in such cases, that is more appropriate than which. If you see here, the police usually ask for every detail that helps identify the missing person. So desert is all that he wants. If you just put which, as I said, which would usually, you would talk about an information which is not very essential, or which is just giving an extra information. So if you see here, the police usually ask for detail. Here it ends, but helps identify missing the person. So it still is talking about the main clause of the sentence, and it doesn't seem like an extra added information or something. It's still talking about why the intention of police detail collection. It is for identifying. Even though it seems like separated from the main clause, but it still is an essential form, because it is still talking about the main clause and giving more information. If you just remove it, you would simply see the police usually ask for every detail, but still there is some abrupt ending. But why do they ask for? Because they want to identify the missing person. So that is used. And if you see, desert is all that he wants. So here in this case also, desert is all that he wants. Desert is all which he wants. Again, it makes it separated from the main clause, and it gives an indication that it could be non-essential one. And same goes with the superlative degree. You're talking about best resource. This is the best resource that I have ever read. So again, that is referring to the resource, best resource, and best is the superlative one here. So that is preferred because these pieces of information is basically still forms part of main clause, giving more adequate clarity on what is coming to be and what is the intention for that one would be. So these are the things, and I'll give you I'll just mention two examples to you. I think that would because usually we might have a doubt that why do we have to use relative pronouns? Like, does they really have any importance in the sentence? Like, well, what could be the reason why it could be used? What happens if I don't put comma, or if I don't use a relative pronoun? How would it be? So I'll tell the importance of them. So if you see here in this example, there is a sentence here which says they have two sons who are doctors. Can anyone tell me the meaning of this sentence? What you could understand from this sentence? They have two sons who are doctors. If you can please tell me what you can infer from this information, this sentence.
Both their sons are doctors.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Sina, you said both their sons are doctors, right?
Yeah.
So basically you are saying they have two sons.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do they have only two sons?
No.
Do we get that information from this?
No,
this
the
sentence?
only part is not there. No.
It is not there. Still, there is some missing pieces in this, right?
Yeah.
because they have 2 sons who are doctors. What we can get is they have 2 sons who are doctors, which means they have 2 doctor sons. We still not know they have more sons or some architect sons or some engineer sons. We still don't have the clarity, but what we could inform is they have 2 sons who are doctors. We'll go to the next sentence. If you see this one, they have 2 sons who are doctors. What you could infer from this sentence? Can anyone explain?
They have only 2 sons.
Correct. So they have here in this case, just by putting the comma, you would simply, what you can infer from is they have only 2 sons. And who are doctors is actually talking about extra informations. So this comma is giving an extra additional information. Even if you remove who are doctors, it could still stand. They have 2 sons. That's what you wanted to say, and you're describing the sons. They are doctors. But in the above one, it's still not confirmed whether they have 2 sons or 5 sons or what the information. So that's the importance of relative pronoun or usage of comma or that, which, who, or this thing. So there are more certain other elements also which we have not discussed. It's already 10:02. We could continue this from our next session. So yeah, that's it for today.
In the next slide, in the next slide, that here so that's the additional part. So without that also, the first sentence has the right meaning, but on the previous one, it's not an additional part. Without that, the first sentence is not the right thing. It's not the correct thing. Okay.
It together becomes a single sentence here.
Okay.
Here it is giving additional information, but in this case, it is not talking like, it is not standing like an additional information.
So here it is restrictive. There it is not restrictive.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Correct. So these are the 2 sentences, and we have some other additional important rules in this, which we could continue from our next session. I'll stop this session here.